I stared at the Christmas gift box in my hands, my fingers trembling as I read the note attached to it. Next year, you'll celebrate in the nursing home. The words, written in my granddaughter Sarah's elegant handwriting, seemed to float off the paper and pierce my heart like tiny daggers. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The living room suddenly felt cold despite the crackling fireplace and the cheerful Christmas decorations I'd spent days putting up. My chest tightened as I carefully folded the note and placed it back in the small envelope. "Everything okay, Grandma?" Sarah asked, her voice sweet as honey as she sipped the hot chocolate I had prepared earlier. She was watching me with those calculating eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me with genuine love when she was a little girl. "Yes, dear. It's lovely," I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. Sarah beamed, seemingly satisfied with my reaction. She had no idea that inside I was crumbling. "I thought it was clever. Dad says we need to start planning for your future, you know. You're not getting any younger." At 64, I wasn't exactly on death's doorstep, but Sarah made it sound like I had one foot in the grave already. I'd raised her since she was 8 years old, after my daughter, her mother, died in that terrible car accident. 16 years of my life dedicated to giving her everything, and this was what I'd become to her, an inconvenience to be discarded. Later that evening, after Sarah left to meet friends for Christmas drinks, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The silence magnified the echo of Sarah's words in my mind. I remembered the nights I'd stayed up helping her with school projects, the 3 jobs I worked to put her through, that expensive private school she'd insisted on attending, the vacations I canceled so she could go to summer camps. All those years I'd convinced myself that my daughter would have wanted me to give Sarah the best of everything. But now, the truth was staring me in the face. I was just a means to an end. My hands stopped shaking as I reached for my phone and opened my banking app. For the past 5 years, I'd been paying for Sarah's extravagant lifestyle, the designer clothes, the luxury apartment in the city, and most recently, a lavish New Year's Eve trip to the Maldives. All charged to the credit card I'd added her name to because family helps family. With 3 taps, I blocked the card. The notification came almost immediately. A text from Sarah. "Grandma, something's wrong with the card. The travel agency called." I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the bottom drawer of my dresser, lifting out the false bottom where I kept important documents. There it was. A deed to my house with strange markings and signatures I didn't recognize. I had found it last week while cleaning, but had dismissed it as some mistake. Now it made horrible sense. The nursing home wasn't just a cruel joke. It was a plan already in motion. They needed me out of my house, the house I had paid off through decades of hard work, the house where I had raised both my daughter and granddaughter. My phone buzzed again. Sarah calling now. I let it go to voicemail. For the first time in 16 years, I allowed myself to feel something beyond grief and obligation. Anger. Pure, clarifying anger that burned away the fog of manipulation I'd been living in. Sarah had made a grave mistake. She thought I was just a feeble old woman, too blinded by love to see what was happening. She had forgotten who I was before I became just grandma, a business owner, a widow who had navigated life's worst storms alone, a woman who had rebuilt her life from scratch once before. I looked at the calendar hanging on my wall, at the dates marked for Sarah's New Year's trip. By the time she realized what had happened, I would already be 3 steps ahead. "Merry Christmas to me," I whispered to the empty room as I picked up the phone to call my old friend Margaret, who happened to be the best estate attorney in the county. The snow fell gently outside my window as I sipped my morning coffee, watching the neighborhood children build snowmen in their front yards. It had been 3 days since Christmas, 3 days since I'd blocked Sarah's card, and my phone had been buzzing nonstop with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. 16 years. That's how long I'd been raising Sarah after my daughter Emily's death. The memory of that terrible night still haunted me. The police officers at my door, their faces solemn as they delivered the news of the car accident. Sarah, only 8 years old then, clutching her stuffed rabbit as she asked when her mommy was coming home. I set down my coffee cup and moved to the old mahogany chest in my living room. Inside were photo albums I rarely looked at anymore because they hurt too much. But today, I needed to remember. The first photo was of Emily on her wedding day. She looked so much like her father, my Robert, who had passed away when Emily was just 14. Emily had married young, too young in my opinion, to a charming man named David who turned out to be anything but charming after the honeymoon ended. "You always hated him," Sarah had accused me once during a teenage tantrum. "You never gave my dad a chance." I never corrected her. Never told her about the nights Emily would show up at my doorstep with bruises she claimed came from walking into a door. Never mentioned how I'd begged Emily to leave him, how I'd offered her money, a place to stay, anything to get her and Sarah away from that man. Emily had always refused, saying Sarah needed her father. In the end, it wasn't David who took Emily from us, but a patch of black ice on a winter night, much like this one. I flipped through more pages, Sarah's first day of school after moving, in with me, her middle school graduation, her as a teenager trying on prom dresses. So many moments, so many sacrifices. I had retired early from my job as an accountant to care for her properly. I'd sold my vacation home on the lake that Robert and I had purchased for our retirement. I'd even sold my wedding rings to help pay for Sarah's first year of college when the scholarship she'd been counting on fell through. "You don't need to do that, Grandma," she'd said, but her eyes had lit up at the thought of not having to take out loans. "Your education is more important than a piece of jewelry," I'd told her. "Your mother would have wanted this." I'd used my daughter's memory as a compass for every decision, convinced that giving Sarah everything would somehow make up for Emily's absence. But somewhere along the way, giving became expected, and then demanded. The last photo in the album was from Sarah's college graduation. She stood between me and David, who had reappeared in her life just as she was entering adulthood. He'd been the one to suggest she move to the city, the one who encouraged her to find herself on my dime. I closed the album and returned it to the chest. Looking back now, I could see how David had planted seeds of entitlement in Sarah, how he'd subtly turned her against me with comments about how I was controlling when I asked where the money was going, or how I was stuck in the past when I shared stories about Emily. My phone rang again, Sarah's ringtone. This time I answered. "Grandma? What the hell?" Her voice was sharp, nothing like the sweet tone she'd used on Christmas Day. "The resort just called again. They're going to give away our reservation if we don't confirm payment today." "I'm not paying for the trip, Sarah." My voice was calmer than I expected it to be. "What? Why not? Is something wrong with your accounts? Do you need me to come over and help you sort it out?" Always the assumption that I was incompetent, that I couldn't manage without her help. "Nothing's wrong with my accounts. I've simply decided not to pay for this trip." Silence then. "Is this because of Dad? Did he say something to upset you?" "You know how he gets sometimes, but he doesn't mean it." "This isn't about your father." I took a deep breath. "It's about the note you wrote me for Christmas, about the nursing home." Sarah laughed, the sound brittle and forced. "That was just a joke, Grandma. God, you're so sensitive sometimes." Was it also a joke when you and your father discussed selling my house? When you had papers drawn up to transfer the deed without telling me? Another silence. Longer this time. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had lost its sharp edge, replaced with something syrupy and cajoling. "Grandma, you're confused. No one's trying to sell your house. We're just worried about you living alone. You nearly fell in the shower last month, remember? I hadn't fallen. I'd mentioned my arthritis acting up once, and somehow that story had transformed each time Sarah retold. I'm not confused, Sarah. I'm finally seeing clearly. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the snow continue to fall. I've given you everything for 16 years. I've put your needs above my own. I think it's time I started taking care of myself. What does that mean? Now there was worry in her voice, the kind that comes not from concern but from fear of losing something valuable. Grandma, you're scaring me. It means things are going to change, I said softly, more to myself than to her. It means I'm not just your ATM anymore. I hung up before she could respond. Outside, the children had finished their snowman, placing a colorful scarf around its neck. One of them waved at me, and I waved back, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. The first week of January arrived with a bitter cold snap that matched the ice forming between Sarah and me. After our phone call, she'd tried everything: tearful voicemails, angry texts, even sending her father to check on me one evening. I hadn't answered the door. I needed space to think, to plan, to understand just how deep this betrayal went. That morning, I decided to organize my home office, something I'd been putting off for months. The drawer of my filing cabinet stuck as I tried to open it, as if resisting my efforts to uncover its secrets. When it finally gave way, I was met with a chaotic jumble of papers that made my accountant's heart cringe. "One thing at a time, Alice," I muttered to myself, the sound of my own voice startling in the quiet house. I began sorting through bank statements, insurance policies, and property tax assessments. Everything seemed in order until I reached the stack of credit card statements. I'd always prided myself on keeping meticulous financial records, but these particular statements looked unfamiliar. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the first envelope. It was indeed my credit card, but the statement showed charges I couldn't recall making: expensive restaurants in parts of town I never visited, high-end boutiques I'd never heard of, even charges from jewelry stores and electronics retailers. Grabbed the next statement, and the next, each one revealing a similar pattern. Over the past year alone, there had been nearly $30,000 in charges I couldn't account for. My stomach tightened as I realized what must have happened. Sarah had my credit card information. Of course she did. I'd added her as an authorized user years ago for emergencies. But these weren't emergencies, these were extravagances. I pulled out my laptop, the one Sarah had insisted on buying for me last birthday because my old one was embarrassingly outdated. Now I wondered if that too had been part of a plan. I logged into my online banking portal, something Sarah had set up for me, claiming it would be easier for me to manage my finances. What I found made my blood run cold. There were regular transfers, from my savings account to an account I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, $200 here, $300 there, but growing larger and more frequent over the past 6 months. The most recent transfer, made just 2 days before Christmas, was for $5,000. With shaking fingers, I clicked on the account number. It belonged to David. Sarah's father, my former son-in-law, had been siphoning money from my savings, and there was only one way he could have accessed it. My granddaughter had given him my banking information. The room seemed to spin around me. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. When I opened them again, I noticed a folder I didn't recognize, tucked at the back of the drawer. I pulled it out, the label reading simply, "Grandma's Care Options" in Sarah's handwriting. Inside were brochures for nursing homes, but not the kind I would have chosen for myself. Not the dignified retirement communities with private apartments, and active social calendars. These were clinical facilities, places where people went when they had no other options, when their families could no longer, or would not, care for them. One brochure had been marked with sticky notes and highlighting. Affordable basic care was circled in red, and in the margins someone had scribbled, Medicaid covers after assets depleted. My hands were no longer shaking. A strange calm had settled over me, the kind that comes when shock gives way to clarity. I picked up my phone and did something I should have done years ago. I called my bank and requested an immediate freeze on all my accounts. Then I called a locksmith. By the time Sarah arrived unannounced that evening, the locks had been changed, and I was waiting for her in the living room. The evidence of her betrayal spread out on the coffee table before me. "Grandma, why aren't you answering your phone? And why is my key not working?" She burst in after I opened the door, irritation written across her face. Then she saw what was on the table, and her expression changed to something I'd never seen before. A flash of guilt quickly masked by indignation. "Have you been going through my things?" she demanded, as if this were her house, her privacy that had been violated. "They're not your things, Sarah. They're my bank statements, my credit card bills, my money." My voice was steady, though my heart was breaking. "And you've been stealing from me." "That's ridiculous," she scoffed, but her eyes darted nervously to the documents. "I've been helping you manage your finances because you get confused. Remember when you paid the electric bill twice last year?" I had never paid any bill twice in my life. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "It's time we had an honest conversation." Sarah didn't sit. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Dad." "You're not well, Grandma. You're paranoid and confused. This is exactly why we've been looking at care facilities for you." That's when I realized she truly believed her own lies. In her mind, I was already incompetent, already a burden to be managed rather than a person to be respected. "If you call your father," I said quietly, "the next call I make will be to the police." Her finger froze above the screen. "You wouldn't dare." I met her gaze steadily. "Try me." 3 weeks after my confrontation with Sarah, the house felt emptier than it ever had before. She hadn't called again, not after I'd shown her the evidence of her betrayal, not after I'd made it clear that I knew exactly what she and her father had been planning. "You need help, Grandma," she'd said as she left that night, her voice dripping with false concern. "I hope you realize that before it's too late." Her words had haunted me during those first few sleepless nights, making me question myself despite everything I'd discovered. Was I overreacting? Was I, as Sarah suggested, becoming paranoid in my old age? But each morning, I would look at the stack of financial documents, at the systematic way they had been draining my accounts, and my resolve would strengthen. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't confused. I was finally seeing the truth. On a particularly cold Tuesday morning, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Eleanor? It's Alice." My voice sounded strange to my own ears, hesitant yet determined. "Alice Hampton? Well, I'll be damned." Eleanor's warm laugh brought an immediate smile to my face. "I was just thinking about you the other day. How have you been, stranger?" Eleanor and I had been inseparable in our younger years, working together at the accounting firm before I'd left to care for Sarah. She had tried to maintain our friendship, inviting me to lunches and book clubs, but I had always declined too, busy with Sarah's activities, too exhausted from the demands of single parenting. "I've been better," I admitted. "I was wondering if you might have time for that lunch you've been offering for the past decade." We met at a small cafe downtown, one I'd never visited despite having lived in this town my entire life. Eleanor looked much the same, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob, her eyes still sparkling with the same intelligence and wit I remembered. "Spill it," she said after we'd ordered, never one to waste time on pleasantries. "What's going on with you?" So I told her everything, about raising Sarah, about the years of financial support, about the Christmas gift and the discovery of their plans to put me in a nursing home and sell my house. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "The same thing happened to my sister Jean," she said quietly. "Her son and daughter-in-law did something similar, convinced her she was no longer capable of living alone, that they were just trying to help by taking control of her finances. By the time she realized what was happening, they had drained almost all her savings." My throat tightened. "What did she do?" "She fought back," Eleanor said simply. "And I helped her. Now I'm going to help you too." Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor outlined a plan. First, we would secure my remaining assets with the help of her son, who was an attorney specializing in elder law. Then, we would document everything Sarah and David had taken. Finally, we would rebuild my life, not around Sarah, but around what I wanted for myself. "When was the last time you did something just for you, Alice?" Eleanor asked as we walked back to our cars. "Not for Sarah, not for Emily's memory, but just because it made you happy?" I couldn't remember. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. I met with Eleanor's son, Michael, who was kind but businesslike as he helped me create a revocable trust to protect my assets. We documented the unauthorized withdrawals and credit card charges, creating a paper trail that left no doubt about what had happened. "You have options," Michael explained during our second meeting. "We could pursue criminal charges for the unauthorized access to your accounts, or we could handle this civilly, with a demand letter first." The thought of seeing Sarah in legal trouble made my heart ache, despite everything. "Let's start with the civil approach," I decided. "I don't want to punish her. I just want to protect what's mine." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll draft the letter today. In the meantime, have you thought about what Eleanor suggested? About finding something for yourself?" I had been thinking about it. For years, I'd put my own interests aside, convincing myself that Sarah's needs were more important. But now, with this unexpected freedom, I felt both liberated and lost. "Used to paint," I said quietly, surprising myself with the admission. "Before Emily died, before Sarah came to live with me. I was quite good at it, actually." "Then maybe it's time to pick up a brush again," Michael suggested with a gentle smile. That afternoon, I drove to the art supply store on the edge of town. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and the familiar smell of paint and canvas enveloped me like an old friend. "Can I help you find anything?" A young woman with colorful beads in her hair approached me. I hesitated, suddenly, overwhelmed by the rows of supplies, by the enormity of reclaiming this part of myself. "I need everything. I'm starting over." The woman's face lit up. "Starting over is my specialty. Let me show you our beginner kits. Though something tells me you're not really a beginner, are you?" For the first time in weeks, I laughed. A genuine, surprised sound that felt foreign in my throat. "No, not a beginner. Just someone who lost her way for a while." I left the store with more supplies than I probably needed, but my heart felt lighter than it had in years. As I placed the packages in my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Dinner at my place tomorrow, 7 p.m. No excuses. I've invited some people you should meet." I stared at the message, a flutter of anxiety mixing with unexpected excitement. This was part of Eleanor's plan, too, reintroducing me to a social life I'd abandoned long ago. The old Alice would have made an excuse, would have stayed home out of some misplaced sense of duty or fear. But I wasn't that Alice anymore. "I'll bring wine," I texted back, smiling as I started the car. Eleanor's dinner party had been the first of many social gatherings that gradually filled my calendar over the next 2 months. I'd reconnected with old colleagues, made new friends at the local art studio where I'd started taking classes, and even joined a book club that met every Thursday at the library. For the first time in 16 years, I was living for myself. And the freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was in the middle of setting up my easel by the bay window. The light was perfect there in the late afternoon, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Eleanor always called before dropping by. Through the peephole, I saw David's sleek silver BMW parked in my driveway. Standing on my porch were Sarah and David, both dressed impeccably as if heading to an important meeting. Sarah clutched a small gift bag. My heart pounded as I opened the door, but I kept my expression neutral. "This is a surprise." "Grandma." Sarah's voice was honey-sweet, her smile practiced and perfect. "We've been so worried about you. You haven't been answering your phone." Because I'd blocked her number after our last confrontation. "May we come in?" David asked, already moving forward as if my permission was a mere formality. I stood my ground, not stepping aside. "Actually, I was just in the middle of something." Sarah's smile faltered slightly. "Please, Grandma, we need to talk." I brought you something." She held up the gift bag with a hopeful expression. Against my better judgment, I let them in. The living room looked different now. My painting supplies neatly arranged by the window, colorful throw pillows Eleanor had helped me pick out, brightening the old sofa, and several of my new paintings hanging on the walls. Sarah's eyes darted around, taking in the changes. "You've been redecorating?" "I've been painting again," I said simply, gesturing toward the half-finished landscape on my easel. "That's nice," Sarah said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Grandma, we're really concerned about you. You've been acting so strange lately." David nodded solemnly. "Isolation is often the first sign of cognitive decline, Alice. Cutting off family, making impulsive financial decisions. These are warning signs we can't ignore." I almost laughed at the irony. They were the ones who had been draining my accounts, planning to ship me off to a nursing home, and yet they were concerned about my cognitive health? "I'm not isolated," I said calmly. "In fact, I've been quite social lately, just not with people who steal from me." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a gesture of wounded innocence. "Grandma, not this again. We've never stolen from you. We've only tried to help manage your finances because you get confused sometimes." "Is that what you call it? Managing my finances?" I moved to the desk in the corner and retrieved the folder Michael had prepared. "Because my attorney calls it financial exploitation of an elder. That's a crime in this state, Sarah." The color drained from David's face. "Attorney? What attorney?" I handed him the folder. Inside was a detailed accounting of every unauthorized transaction, every suspicious transfer, along with a formal letter demanding repayment. David flipped through the pages, his expression darkening. Sarah peered over his shoulder, her practiced composure crumbling as she saw the evidence laid out in black and white. "This is ridiculous," David sputtered, tossing the folder onto the coffee table. "We had your permission to use those accounts. Tell her, Sarah." Sarah's eyes darted between her father and me, panic rising in them. You said I could use the card for emergencies, Grandma, and Dad was just helping me invest some money for you. For your future." "My future in a cut-rate nursing home while—" "You sold my house?" I kept my voice steady, even as anger bubbled beneath the surface. "I found the brochures, Sarah. I saw the notes about Medicaid and depleting assets. I know exactly what you were planning." "It wasn't like that," she insisted, though her voice had lost its confidence. "We were just exploring options. You're getting older, and we worry about you living alone." "I'm 64, not 94, I said. "And even if I were 94, that wouldn't give you the right to steal from me or make decisions about my life without my knowledge." David's expression hardened. "We didn't come here to be accused of crimes we didn't commit. We came because we're worried about you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. "We think it would be best if you had a neurological evaluation. We've already spoken to a specialist who's willing to see you next week." I stared at the paper, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. They weren't just planning to put me in a home, they were trying to have me declared incompetent. If they succeeded, they could take control of everything. My house, my money, my entire life. Get out, I said quietly. Grandma, please. Sarah's voice cracked, real tears forming in her eyes. We're trying to help you. I don't need your kind of help. I walked to the door and opened it. If you want to avoid a legal battle, you'll repay every cent you took from me by the end of the month. Otherwise, my attorney will proceed with both civil and criminal complaints. David stepped toward me, his face twisted with anger. You ungrateful. Dad, don't. Sarah grabbed his arm, her eyes wide with alarm. He jerked away from her. Don't. You see what she's doing? She's threatening us. After everything we've done for her, she's treating us like criminals. Because you are criminals, I said simply. And I have the evidence to prove it. David's face flushed dark red. For a moment, I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he turned and stormed out, brushing roughly past me as he went. Sarah lingered, tears streaming down her face now. Grandma, please. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We just wanted to make sure you were taken care of. I looked at my granddaughter, at this stranger who had my daughter's eyes but none of her heart, and felt a profound sadness. No, Sarah. You wanted to take care of yourselves. There's a difference. She reached for my hand, but I stepped back, maintaining the distance between us. The gift bag, she said suddenly, pointing to where she'd left it on the coffee table. At least look at what I brought you. Take it with you, I said. I don't want any more of your gifts. After they left, I sat down on the sofa, my legs suddenly weak. The confrontation had left me drained, but also strangely relieved. There were no more secrets between us, no more pretending. For better or worse, the truth was finally out in the open. My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Still on for dinner tonight? Martha's bringing her famous apple pie. I smiled, grateful for this new circle of genuine friends who wanted nothing from me except my company. Wouldn't miss it, I texted back. 1 year. That's how long it had been since that Christmas when Sarah had given me the nursing home note, the gift that had ultimately freed me from a life of exploitation and silent suffering. 1 year since I'd begun painting again, reconnected with old friends, and discovered that 64 wasn't too late for a new beginning. I hummed to myself as I added the final touches to a small landscape, a lake at sunset, the colors rich and vibrant against the deepening blue of the sky. It was the last piece for my upcoming exhibition at the Community Art Center, a showcase featuring local artists that Eleanor had encouraged me to participate in. You have talent, Alice, she'd insisted after seeing my work. Real talent that deserves to be shared, the doorbell chimed, interrupting my thoughts. I wiped my hands on a cloth and went to answer it, expecting the delivery of new frames I'd ordered. Instead, I found Sarah standing on my porch. She looked different, thinner, less polished. The designer clothes and perfect makeup had been replaced by simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She clutched a small envelope in her hands. Grandma, she said softly, uncertainty in her voice. Can we talk? My first instinct was to close the door, to protect myself from whatever manipulation she might be planning. But something in her expression, a vulnerability I hadn't seen since she was a child, made me hesitate. 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside to let her in. Sarah entered cautiously, her eyes widening as she took in the changes to the house. My paintings now adorned every wall. The furniture had been rearranged to create a cozy reading nook by the fireplace, and photographs of my new friends were displayed prominently on the mantel. Your house looks different, she said, an odd note in her voice. It looks nice. Thank you. I gestured for her to sit. Why are you here, Sarah? She sat on the edge of the sofa, perching there like she might need to flee at any moment. Dad's gone, she said abruptly. He moved to Florida with his new girlfriend. I haven't heard from him in 3 months. I wasn't surprised. David had always been quick to abandon people when they no longer served his purposes. He'd done it to my daughter, and now he'd done it to his own. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it despite everything. Sarah twisted the envelope in her hands. "I've been doing a lot of thinking this past year. About what happened. About what Dad and I did to you." She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I was wrong, Grandma. We were wrong." I'd imagined this moment many times over the past year, Sarah apologizing, admitting what she'd done, but now that it was happening, I found myself unsure how to respond. "It took you a long time to reach that conclusion," I said finally. No." She stared down at her hands. "After you threatened legal action, Dad convinced me it was just your condition talking, that you were confused and paranoid. I believed him because it was easier than facing the truth." She took a shaky breath. "But then I found his notes, detailed plans about selling your house, about finding the cheapest possible care facility, about how we'd split the money." My throat tightened. "And that's when you realized?" "No," she admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "Even then, I made excuses. It wasn't until he left, until I was alone and struggling, that I really started to think about what we'd done to you, how we'd treated you." I studied my granddaughter's face, searching for signs of deception, but found only genuine remorse. Still, I had to be careful. I'd been fooled before. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Sarah held out the envelope. "Because I want to make amends, if it's not too late." Inside the envelope was a check, a substantial one, along with a handwritten note. "This doesn't begin to repay what I took from you, both financially and emotionally. But it's a start." I looked up from the check, surprised. "Where did this money come from?" "I sold my car and some jewelry. I've also been working 2 jobs." She gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Turns out I'm pretty good at waiting tables." The Sarah I'd known a year ago would never have considered such work beneath her. The change was startling. "I don't expect forgiveness," she continued when I didn't speak. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I'm trying to be better." I set the check aside, still processing this unexpected turn of events. "What do you want from me, Sarah?" "Nothing," she said quickly, then hesitated. "Well, that's not entirely true. I saw a flyer at the coffee shop about your art exhibition. Next week, I'd like to come if that's okay. Not to intrude, just to see your work." The request was so simple, so free of the demands and expectations that had characterized our relationship for years, that it caught me off guard. "If you'd like," I said cautiously. Sarah nodded, relief evident in her expression. She stood to leave but paused by the fireplace, her attention caught by a photograph of me with Eleanor and our book club friends, all of us laughing during a weekend trip to the coast. "You look happy," she said quietly. "I am happy," I replied, realizing with some surprise that it was absolutely true. Sarah turned, tears glistening in her eyes. "I'm glad." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Grandma, I really am sorry for everything." After she left, I sat for a long time, staring at the check and the note. I wasn't ready to forgive Sarah. Not yet. Trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired with a single apology or gesture, no matter how sincere. But perhaps, in time, we could build something new. My phone chimed with a text from Thomas, a retired literature professor I'd met through Eleanor's book club. Over the past few months, our friendship had evolved into something deeper, something that made my heart beat a little faster whenever he called. "Reservation confirmed for Friday. Can't wait to see you. T." I smiled, feeling a flutter of anticipation. At 65, I was discovering that romance could be just as exciting as it had been in my youth, perhaps even more so with the wisdom and self-knowledge that came with age. The following week, my exhibition opened to a surprisingly large crowd. Eleanor had rallied all our friends, and the local arts community had turned out in force. To my amazement, 3 of my paintings sold within the first hour. "I told you," Eleanor whispered triumphantly as we watched the gallery owner place "sold" tags beside my work. "Real talent." Thomas stood nearby, pride evident in his warm gaze as he chatted with other guests about his girlfriend, the artist. The term made me blush like a schoolgirl, though I couldn't deny the happiness it brought me. As the evening progressed, I caught sight of Sarah slipping quietly into the gallery. She stood at the back, observing without intruding, genuine admiration on her face as she viewed my paintings. Our eyes met across the room, and I gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. Later, as Thomas and I walked hand in hand through the softly lit downtown streets, he asked about Sarah. "Will you give her another chance?" I considered his question carefully. "I'm not sure, but I think I'm open to the possibility." Thomas squeezed my hand gently. "Whatever you decide, I'm here." That night, lying in bed, I thought about the journey of the past year, from betrayal to independence, from isolation to connection, from being defined by what I gave to others to defining myself through my own passions and choices. Sarah's note had promised that the nursing home was where I'd celebrate next year. Instead, I'd celebrated by reclaiming my life, by finding joy in art and friendship and new love, by learning that 65 wasn't an ending, but a beginning filled with possibilities I'd never imagined. I reached for my sketchbook and began to draw, not landscapes this time, but a self-portrait. The woman emerging on the page had my features but looked somehow younger, her eyes bright with purpose, her smile confident. This was who I had become. Not just Alice the grandmother, not just Alice the widow, but Alice the artist, Alice the friend, Alice the lover, Alice who had discovered that it's never too late to begin again. And for that unexpected gift, I was profoundly grateful.